You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 19th of June 2024 on Monocle Radio. It's 1400 in Beirut, 1300 in Ljubljana, midday here in London and 4 a.m. in Seattle. That's the time on Monocle Radio, brought to you by Chanel Watches. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme.
The situation is serious. We have seen an escalation over the last few weeks. And what President Biden wants to do is to avoid a further escalation.
US Envoy Amos Hochstein visiting Beirut calls for calm after an escalation in cross-border fire between Israel and Hezbollah. Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz says a decision on opening a new front in Lebanon is coming soon. Also ahead.
I am proud of every action we have taken.
Every action you've taken?
Yes, sir.
Wow. There's some news for you. Well, behind you can't see it. Behind you, the folks are showing pictures of the people who are the victims of your safety record.
Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun faces US lawmakers as the company struggles to recover its reputation. Later in the show, we'll hear from our correspondent in the Balkans, wrap up the latest business news, and hear how Basel is installing art where you might least expect to find it. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. With global attention understandably focused on Israel's ongoing assault on Gaza towards the south of the country, few headlines have been garnered by Hezbollah's ongoing assault on Israel in the north. The Lebanese militia has been battering Israel with missiles and drones since last October 8th, and the attacks have recently escalated, 640 last week alone. 28 Israelis have died in these attacks and more than 60,000 have been evacuated from towns near the border. Indications appear to be growing that Israel is now poised to take decisive action. Well, I'm joined now by Alison Kaplan-Sommer, a journalist at Haaretz. Alison, Foreign Minister Israel Katz says there will be a decision on this soon. Do you think the IDF is working towards something big in Lebanon, or is this their way of warning Hezbollah off?
I mean, I don't think they really have a choice but to do something significant in Lebanon if the relentless attacks on the north don't stop. As we speak, there are sirens going off now in the northern city of Kiryat Shmona. The entire 5 kilometers from the border of Lebanon has been completely abandoned. We have whole Israeli cities where people can't live there. And so there's a growing political pressure as the attacks increase and are relentless, that calling on the country's leaders to do something so that the people of the north can somehow return to their homes. It
would not, of course, be the first time in Israel's history that it has fought in several directions at once. But how confident are the government and the IDF that they currently have the capacity to do that?
Well, the fact that nothing's really happened in the north except for some targeted airstrikes against specific Hezbollah commanders and very, very limited operations in Lebanon, I think is proof of the fact that Israel has been doing all it can to avoid a two-front war and in essence has been trying to postpone any action in the north until, it feels like it's really dealt militarily with what's gone on in Gaza. Now, obviously, we don't have any end game for resolving who's going to be in charge in Gaza. But in terms of the military operation, it really looks like the Rafah operation is going to be the last steps in eliminating any significant military capability on the part of Hamas. And that is why Israel is expected very soon to turn its attention to the north.
Is there much trepidation about what a major operation in Lebanon would entail? Obviously, there is some history here as well. There was a long occupation of Lebanon or parts of Lebanon after the IDF followed the PLO into Lebanon. There was a war with Hezbollah in 2006. Do we have any suggestion or any idea of what this one might be like?
There's major trepidation. There's no comparing Hezbollah's capabilities back then when there was the clash 17 years ago, the Second Lebanon War, and their capabilities today. Despite all of Israel's anti-missile capabilities right now, it would rain horrible, terrible destruction not only on the country's north, but they have the capability to hit the center. And I think we're probably talking about thousands and thousands of Israeli casualties. So there's huge amounts of trepidation and huge desire on the part of the Israeli public to avoid a full-out war. On one hand, on the other hand, there's a problem with this long-term threat. How can people build their lives in a part of the country where they know that they're going to be constantly under attack? So there's that push and pull desire. One is to avoid the disaster of an all-out war, and the other is thinking that maybe this is unavoidable in order to make Israel's north a place where people can continue to live.
Are we seeing any efforts by the Israeli government to, I guess, array some diplomatic cover or international support for this? Obviously, Netanyahu in particular has burned an awful lot of international goodwill since last October.
Well, yeah, and he's burning international goodwill that is actively trying to prevent this from happening in Lebanon right now. We have the U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein, who is specifically in Israel right now to try to calm things down in the north. And instead of calming and cooperating, Netanyahu made a very bizarre social media post in which he accused the U.S. government of forestalling weapons shipments that really angered the Americans. And as a result, they downgraded a strategic meeting that was supposed to take place today. So not only is Netanyahu not actively encouraging international support, but he appears to be sabotaging it.
And just finally on Netanyahu, how precarious or otherwise is his position now? Is he diminished by the dissolution of his war cabinet following those resignations of two former IDF chiefs of staff, Gadi Eisenkot and Benny Gantz?
Well, there's signs that he's definitely been diminished. He just suffered a very, which is, an absurd thing that the Israeli Knesset was arguing about subsidies and authority for the appointment of local rabbis, of all things, something in which he would normally politically master a vote in his favor to help keep his ultra-Orthodox coalition allies satisfied and keep his coalition together. And he was not able to garner that support. He failed. So there are signs that the departure of Gantz and Eisenkot are weakening, but there's no real signs that there are any basis for believing that either his far right or his ultra-Orthodox coalition partners would depart his government. And without their departure, the coalition holds together and Netanyahu stays in power.
Alison Kaplan-Sommer at Haaretz, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing. Here is Vincent McAvaney with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. Russia and North Korea have signed an agreement to help each other in the event of aggression against either of them. The deal was signed during Vladimir Putin's first visit to the country in 24 years. This mutual defense pact may have ramifications for Russia's war in Ukraine. Mexico's president-elect, Claudia Sheinbaum, has said indigenous rights are a key priority for upcoming talks on constitutional reform. Mexico is home to over 68 indigenous peoples, representing close to 17 million inhabitants, which is nearly 15% of the country's population. And Zurich Airport's new baggage sorting system is now in operation, 7 years after the project first started. The upgrade, which has a price tag of around 450 million Swiss francs, included cross-belt sorters and high-speed conveyors, making it one of the most advanced baggage sorting systems in the world. The full revamp is due to be completed by 2027. Those are your headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Vincent. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio, and it is time to wrap up the latest news from the Balkans. Guy Delaunay is our man in Ljubljana, but Guy, we're talking first about Serbia and a lithium mine.
We are indeed, because this is potentially going to be the biggest lithium mine in Europe. In fact, the first significant lithium extraction operation in Europe. And it's a project into which Rio Tinto, the international mining giant, wants to invest more than 2 billion euros. And its plans hit the skids 2 years ago when Serbia's government withdrew their permits after mass protests in Belgrade and in the Jadar Valley, where this mine is meant to be going ahead. Now, the Serbian government is saying, we have received environmental guarantees from Rio Tinto. A parliamentary debate on restoring the project has been called, and you can imagine that people on the green left side of things are distinctly dischuffed.
Well, I would think, but on that front, I was going to ask, how vociferous / influential is the environmental lobby in Serbia?
And that was the really interesting thing about why the permits were cancelled a couple of years ago. They got Aleksandar Vučić, the president of Serbia, sufficiently rattled that he decided that he didn't want the lithium issue and the protests that were going on and all the optics, as they like to say, surrounding that playing ahead of a parliamentary election. And so that was the reason for them to be pulled in the first place. So the strength of those protests wasn't just the environmental movement, it was ordinary people being pulled into it on the grounds that they were concerned that things could happen to the food supply in the Jadar Valley, which is an important agricultural area, that the rivers Drina and Sava could be polluted because of the mining operation, and that would affect the drinking water for millions of people. So it was pulling in a lot of people who weren't normally what you'd think of as environmentalists, environmental activists, protesters. And I think Vučić saw this and thought, now, I want this off the agenda when we've got elections. And this was, as I say, a couple of years ago. And to be frank, a lot of us have been waiting for the other foot to drop. When were they going to try and bring it back into the picture?
Well, moving from Serbia's internal ructions to its external ructions, although I guess the fact that Serbia considers these ructions internal is part of the reason that they are external. This, of course, is its relationship with Kosovo and the latest efforts of the person in charge of fixing it.
And I had teed this up, Andrew, as a valedictory for Miroslav Lajčák, who's been the EU special envoy to basically the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue for the past couple of years. And it looked like this was going to be his last hurrah visiting Kosovo and Serbia. He started yesterday evening, he's continuing throughout today, arriving in Belgrade in the evening, meeting all the top officials. And I thought more or less this was going to be goodbye and thanks for nothing. But in fact, he's just announced that his mandate has been extended until January. And it would seem he's determined one way or another to get these people talking to each other meaningfully once more in a room in Brussels, where he will also be sitting along with Josep Borrell and trying to bang some heads together and get Serbia and Kosovo to actually implement the agreements that they have made at various stages last year, 2015, 2013. Various very important elements of which are still not implemented. And, so I'd expected Mr. Lajčák to be bowing out, but it seems that he is cracking on.
What is the actual sticking point there, though, Guy? Is it just the fact that Serbia still has this thing where it believes that any discussions with Kosovo is kind of inching towards having to recognise its sovereignty almost by default?
I mean, there's an element of that, but it's from both sides, Andrew. And I know that people always criticise journalists who talk about issues on both sides, but there really are. What you've got at the moment in office in the most important offices in Serbia and Kosovo are in essence the two worst people in terms of getting together and coming up with some sort of agreement where they can learn to live with it and rub along together. So you've got Aleksandar Vučić, president of Serbia. You've got Albin Kurti, who's the prime minister of Kosovo. They cheerfully loathe each other. And Mr. Kurti is an absolutely unapologetic Albanian nationalist. He really doesn't like Mr. Vučić one little bit. And his attitude throughout the talks has been that he is not willing to bend one iota to give anything that Serbia would be able to see as, okay, that's a concession. So he's not been willing to move in any way, shape or form whatsoever. And that's why Kosovo's been under what's been known euphemistically as European Union measures for about the past year or so, because they weren't cooperating in the process. Now, it seems those measures may be about to be lifted, and presumably that's some sort of encouragement for Kosovo to return to the negotiating table in Brussels and approach things with more of an element of compromise. But you're right as well, Andrew. There's no way that Serbia is going to recognise Kosovo, certainly not in terms of legal recognition, but it's not very keen on the de facto sort either.
And Guy, just finally, the European Football Championships are, of course, underway in Germany, but attended by football fans from Serbia, Croatia and Albania. What could possibly go wrong?
What indeed? So I'll be bracing myself for Croatia-Albania this afternoon. I don't think there's any particular enmity between those two sets of fans, but they're quite capable of causing issues by themselves. The Croatia supporters have been filmed around Germany singing Ustasha-era songs. So this is going back to the Nazi regime, the genocidal Nazi-allied regime in Croatia in the 1940s. And the Serbian and Albanian fans have been playing very much on the Kosovo issue. So you've had Albanian fans turning up in Kosovo Liberation Army uniforms, displaying Kosovo Liberation Army flags of the Greater Albania. UEFA's charged them for this, of course. Serbia, of course, they've had their maps of Kosovo overlaid with the Serbian eagle and the words Kosovo no surrender over the top. So they've faced UEFA charges as well. So it's fun on the pitch and off the pitch too.
Guy Delorne, thanks as always for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It's time now for the latest business news with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. And Ewan, pub quiz masters up and down Great Britain looking forward tonight to asking their contenders to name the world's most valuable company.
Andrew, if you'd invested $1,000 in a chip startup called NVIDIA when it was first offered on the New York Stock Exchange, or the NASDAQ rather, 24 years ago, and held on to them, you'd now be sitting on a profit of close to $6 million. The company whose shares are up 173% just this year is a key player, arguably the key player in the AI boom. Yesterday saw the company unseat Microsoft as the world's most valuable company with a market capitalization of $3.3 trillion. To put that rather large number in context, the entire FTSE 100 in London, 100 very large companies, is worth a mere $2.7 trillion. Now, NVIDIA has a commanding position in the chips needed to train and run AI systems. Google, Microsoft, Meta and the like are some of its big customers, but customers are not in short supply. In fact, production is really the big constraint on NVIDIA. That's where analysts are asking about problems because they're having difficulty supplying enough of these things, but there's plenty of people buying them. It wasn't always this way. AI is a news story. NVIDIA was a video chip maker, a successful one, but not to the level that we're seeing in recent years. But the company has really positioned itself as the company making the shovels, if you like, for the AI boom. So it's the company putting the systems in place behind the scenes. And so far, it has a big lead in that market. And the company and the stock market is pretty excited about it.
Ewan, for those of us who didn't, for the sake of argument, spend $1,000 on NVIDIA stock way back when, can we possibly anticipate any schadenfreude of the sort that comes with watching a bubble popping?
Well, the company is very profitable. It's making a large amount of money, and the forecast for its profits keep getting upgraded. Certainly, the shares are expensive. If you look at the price-earnings ratio, which is a commonly used measure of how expensive a share is, they are not cheap. But that is because the anticipation is that there are lots and lots of earnings coming down the line. I suppose if I were investing in this and thinking perhaps a few years down the line, you just have to wonder if the AI boom will slow at some point. Presumably it will when all these companies have bought enough chips and they don't need any more. So quite what happens then, I think, is another question. But at the moment, the shares just seem to keep going up.
And you and France and Italy have both been summoned to see the headmaster.
Yeah, it's election season in France after President Emmanuel Macron unexpectedly dissolved the National Assembly. And while the parties throw out expensive pledges, there is a bit of an unwelcome fly in the ointment. France is one of 7 EU member states that have been reprimanded by Brussels for running outsized government deficits. France, total government debt, 114% of annual economic output. Italy, 137% of annual GDP are the two most high profile. But also on the naughty step, Belgium, Hungary, Malta, Poland and Slovakia. Now, this makes them subject to the EU's so-called excessive deficit procedure that requires remedial action and can lead to fines for non-compliance. The regime, which is known as the Stability and Growth Pact, has been suspended for a while. It was suspended for the duration of the pandemic to allow all that spending on support. And then, of course, we had Europe's energy crisis, which required more emergency spending by governments. But Brussels has judged that it's time to get back to controlling all this borrowing. The Commission's actually spent the last few years recalibrating the regime, and the revamped rules allow for greater enforcement through fines. If you think back to the old system, that was a system of sanctions that was never really activated in the past. Member states have been given 3 months to submit medium-term plans to commit to a ceiling for net spending growth for the next 4 years. So I think that's something that's not going to be very welcome for aspiring political leaders on the campaign trail in France.
Ewan Potts, thanks as always for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. It seems certain to earn a place in the pantheon of corporate understatement. Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun, facing a wigging from a US Senate subcommittee yesterday, described the company's culture as far from perfect.
You don't recognize the Boeing that has airplanes falling out of the sky? That has had 2 Maxes crash, that has had pieces of doors fall out of the sky, that have had whistleblowers come before. They've sat right where you have sat and told us, these are your employees who have told us that when these are the engineers, by the way. Are you an engineer?
I'm not, sir.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And they have said that they're not listened to, that they're retaliated against, that they're threatened. That's the reality of Boeing today.
The US Justice Department is also pursuing a criminal investigation against Boeing. Well, I'm joined now by the aviation analyst Sally Gethin. Sally, first of all, what did we learn from that hearing, or was it just an excuse for senators to get on the news by yelling at the CEO?
Well, I don't know if it was an excuse for senators to get in the news by yelling at the CEO, but I do think there was something of posturing about it, in the sense that what else can the US federal government, Congress throw against Boeing and its CEO anymore? Don't forget that this CEO is leaving at the end of the year. He's on a reputed $33 million salary. And yes, he's standing there showing contrition, and he apologized to the next of kin of those devastating crashes in 2018, 2019. But at the end of the day, it's all words. So much has been brought against Boeing to force it into cleaning up its act. But the culture is so pervasive that has led to this point that really, what else can happen now to force Boeing into improving its performance?
I mean, those 2 crashes, the 737 MAX crashes, both happened before Dave Calhoun became CEO in 2020. But did we get a sense from him of what fundamentally he thinks went wrong, and perhaps more constructively, what he's done to redress it since?
Well, sadly, the train has left the station in terms of the MAX crashes, except for the fact that the Department of Justice is bringing judicial action against Boeing over those crashes. I mean, Dave Calhoun was not the CEO at that time. It was Dennis Muhlenberg in charge. So in a way, he can plead some sort of ignorance in that regard. But and now the focus is on all the recent incidents. So those 2 crashes were supposed to have been fully investigated, and the fixes done, which was to do with this little bit of kit on the plane called MCAS. And now we're still in a situation of more problems. And the critical point to this investigation and this Senate hearing now is more whistleblowers have come forward, particularly a guy called Sam Mohawk, who is claiming that a lot of non-conformant parts, in other words, faulty parts, he's been a whistleblower and brought this to the attention of the government, the FAA and Boeing, and nothing has happened. So the concern is there are continuing to be problems with aircraft assembly and maintenance at Boeing.
Do we understand, going back to those criminal charges that may be pending that you mentioned, how much trouble Boeing could potentially be in?
Well, yeah, on paper it looks like, oh gosh, this is very dramatic. But in actual fact, Boeing is girding its loins for that and has got its lawyers lined up and is going to vigorously defend Department for Justice legal action. And also don't forget that these things take time. I mean, this sets a precedent. This will be pursued to the nth degree on both sides. I think the question we have to look at, though, is what's going to happen to Boeing in the future. Apparently, it's difficult to get a replacement CEO. Numerous other qualified candidates have turned the job down. And some are even calling for the nationalisation of Boeing in order to really bring an end to this kind of continuous problematic culture where whistleblowers are retaliated against within the company.
And just finally, how close, or possibly how far away might be a better way of putting it, is Boeing to recovering its reputation? Because for obvious reasons, manufacturers of aircraft are fairly vulnerable on the public relations front when one of their products goes catastrophically wrong.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we're hearing monthly, if not weekly. Well, I pick up weekly report incidents of Boeing airplanes showing some faulty performance. Not all of it is their fault. It can be, external factors. But like I said, those headlines, those bad stories aren't going away. And as long as they continue, then, we have all these other activities going on, like the Department for Justice action, which we previously discussed, then there's no end in sight. It looks like, even if there was, I think it would take a good, maybe a year, 12 months for Boeing to start shaking off that kind of tarnished image. But unfortunately, it's dogged by ongoing reports, issues, whistleblowers. There are indications there are 20 whistleblowers waiting in the wings now to actually make their claims public of certain activities at the company. So nothing bad is going away for Boeing. It's got a long journey ahead.
Sally Gethin, thank you for joining us. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio, and finally on today's show, a shopping centre might not feel like a natural venue in which to display art. But during Art Basel, plenty of off-piste venues around the city are transformed into exhibition spaces. This year, Clara Shopping is playing host to the work of the Malaysian-Palestinian artist Mandy El Sayar. The 2 rooms she has created are responses to the war in Gaza. They include layered images that highlight the circulation of images in news media, as well as video and sound works, and special performances in collaboration with a choreographer and movement artist. Mandy spoke to Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs.
We're in the top floor of the mall, and there are 2 abandoned spaces that we were kindly given. One is a restaurant with a bar, and the other is a disused hair salon. So they're facing each other and they're very atmospheric. We're also snuggled between 2 blessing spaces. So one is a nail salon, Chinese nail salon with a Buddha on the right, and the other, I think, is a Kurdish tailors we have the evil eye hanging at the top. So this whole thing is about talismanic protection and what's happened in the recent news, and how to transmute or think about these events and frame them in a way that is hopefully blessing all those deaths and giving them, like, I guess, a ritualistic kind of holding space where things are being systematically erased on top of the human lives. There's a lot. I'm a maximalist, so each space, the restaurant space is quite, I'd like to say ethereal, but some people have disagreed with me. We have a nice white muslin floor, latex floor, and then paintings are hung on top of incomplete fragments of other paintings. I work primarily on the floor in my studio, and they take months to build up. So we got a grid pattern, which is the typical motif, with kufiyas on top, and then this motif that I have used since the October last year, which is of a square holding images. So this is a square of a baby, and then thinking about ritualistic protection again. And there's a golden square that's used in Chinese culture on this thing called hell money or joss paper, which we burn for the dead. They come in stacks, and they have this gold foil square. You can see one there. That signifies wealth for the dead. So again, thinking about the death and cultures that have embodied those kind of traditions, where we're respecting ancestral histories. If you look on the floor, it's a lacquered latex floor, and the spread was taken for October last year, and it's a ready-made collage. Like, I didn't need to intervene. It has Tiffany, Anya Taylor-Joy on the left, which is the back page of the Financial Times. On the front, it shows the news of, like, economy of, like, bodies and the military war complex, soldiers. So again, that ready-made collage of that being on the left, that being on the right, I literally just printed it over and over again with silk screen. I didn't have to, it's better than anything I could have made. You can't make this up, right? And I know poor Anya Taylor has been singled out because she went to the Met Gala with massive Tiffany diamonds. And again, those hold the two disjointed realities of luxury, commerce, and war and necropolitics. So that was the baseline, and I've just split the page in half with these kind of diptychs. So that's how they come. And then I've, like, layered on these colors, this palette, which is, again, the square motif, and tried to kind of translate them into joss paper. So you look on the shelves, you see those golden square papers. So using that as the kind of format, so giving it a signal, central point. There's gold foil, again, so kind of blessing this horror as a kind of attempt at transmutation.
That was the artist Mandy El-Sayah speaking with Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs at Art Basel, and that is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Vincent McAvaney, our researcher was George Ruskin, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons, with assistance from Lily Austin. The Briefing returns tomorrow at the same time, midday UK. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.